Today we meet Jesus and his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. This sea provides a backdrop for so many of the key moments we associate with Jesus' ministry. This is where he calls his first disciples, Peter and Andrew, James and John. They're all fishermen who choose to leave their nets behind in order to follow Jesus. Jesus teaches crowds beside the sea, sometimes even moving onto a boat when the crowd gets too large. He and the disciples cross the sea back and forth by boat several times. And when we read of Jesus walking on water, that's also the Sea of Galilee. Now, you may have noticed that our scripture doesn't mention the Sea of Galilee by name, but refers to a lake. Technically, this is correct, because the Sea of Galilee is not a sea at all, but Israel's largest freshwater lake. And you can find it on a map today as Lake Tiberias, on the border of northeast Israel and Syria. Our scripture starts off with such a simple proposition. Jesus tells his disciples, let's cross over to the other side of the lake. What could possibly go wrong? But when the disciples get out on the water, a sudden storm catches them by surprise, with powerful winds and waves that start filling up their boat. It's also evening, so all this is taking place in the dark. The wind, the noise of the storm, and the water that keeps coming over the sides of their boat. It's frightening, even for the veteran fishermen sailing with Jesus. We can feel the chaos, and the disciples fear that at any moment, the boat could sink below the water. In their panic, they wake up Jesus. I can only tell you that the Gospel of Mark clearly says that Jesus was sleeping. I have no explanation for how he managed to sleep through this storm. But somehow, Jesus is peacefully sleeping on a pillow, and the disciples have to wake him up to ask, "Teacher, don't you care that we're drowning?" In response, Jesus then gives orders to the wind and says to the lake, "Silence, be still." And immediately, that wind dies down. A great calm settles over the lake, and the disciples are overcome with awe. Now, for most of us, the frightening storms we face are less likely to happen out on the water and more likely to take place in our everyday lives. We think of the sudden storms, like the unexpected death of a spouse or a loved one, a job loss or a car accident, or other storms that are longer lasting, unresolved family conflicts, ongoing physical or mental health issues. And of course, we're all experiencing an unprecedented storm now with COVID, with disruption around the world, in our church, and in all of our lives. For our first question this morning, I invite you to reflect on this for yourself or talk about it with a friend or family member you're watching worship with. When have you felt like Jesus was sleeping through your storm? Like the disciples, it's not only the exterior storms that we face, it's also our inner storms, when we start to wonder, is Jesus even paying attention here? Is God listening to my prayers? And if so, then why is my boat still filling up with water? These times of doubt and struggles with our faith almost always coincide with times of crisis, when we're thrown off balance by life events. When life is going along smoothly, we don't ask, where is God in this? It takes a storm for us to wrestle with that question. Now, in the scripture, after Jesus calms the storm, he asks the disciples, "Why are you frightened? Don't you have faith yet?" What does Jesus mean by that? Sometimes we define faith as our beliefs, what we believe about God or what we believe about Jesus. But in the Bible, we often see faith as more closely related to trust. And in the storm, this is the deeper issue. The disciples accused Jesus of not caring whether they drown in the storm. In fact, the disciples don't fully trust Jesus. They had enough faith to leave their nets behind and follow him, but not enough to trust him in the face of their fears. Although, to be honest, I feel a great deal of sympathy for the disciples. I know how much of a challenge it is to trust Jesus through my own crises. When I'm the one frantically bailing water out of my boat in the middle of the storm, I can lose sight of the fact that God still loves and cares for me. Trusting Jesus in the storm is an easy thing to preach about, but in real life, it takes hard spiritual work. We depend on God to quiet the chaos of our thoughts and worries. And we often turn to silence and prayer so that we can hear the voice of the one who tells us, "Be still." Listening for that steady voice of love deep within can help us find a sense of balance and peace even in a crisis. For our second reflection question, I invite you to think about this on your own or discuss with a friend. When have you found peace by going through a storm? It's Father's Day today, and I've been thinking about the storm of having our first child and all the subsequent chaos. The piles of laundry and diapers, new worries and responsibilities, arguments about exactly who was going to do what, and trying to work all this out without enough sleep to even think clearly. But that's the storm that Tom and I went through as we learned to be parents together. And in making it through that storm of the first year, we came out on the other side with a deeper trust in each other and a deeper commitment to our family. In our merged church, we have a similar kind of work ahead of us as we come together to truly become one church. There are necessary stages of growth as any new group learns to work together, and it will be helpful for us to be aware of these in the coming months. In the first stage, called forming, people are generally positive but polite. They may feel anxious, but make an effort to get to know each other. And then we get to the second stage, which is even called storming. As you can guess, this is the stage when conflicts show up. We find out that we have different personalities and different working styles. As we figure out who does what and how, we realize we don't always agree. But if we stick with it, the storming stage moves into norming, when we begin to resolve our differences. We begin to see each other's strengths and how to work with them, rather than against them. We learn to respect each other, ask each other for help, and become committed to what are now our shared goals. The last stage is performing, when we really work together well and can finally achieve our shared goals. Our church may not move through the stages exactly like this, and teams can move back and forth between storming and norming as new issues come up. But this is a general idea of what to expect. We will weather some storms together. And these storms are not a sign of failure. They're a sign that we're learning to work together. The storms mean we're getting somewhere. We're actually making progress. Throughout all these stages, we also look to Jesus to guide us safely through. We remember that in the early church, a boat was a symbol used for the church itself. Even today, at churches like Summit, you can see that symbol in our sanctuary architecture. A sanctuary looks just like an upside-down wooden boat. And in this symbol, we're reminded that the church is sent out by Jesus for a voyage, for risk-taking, for the sake of ministry. That's the adventure we signed up for when we said yes to following Jesus. And when we joined a church, we committed to do this work together with one another. Jesus never promised us that our journey would be conflict-free or easy, or that we wouldn't face storms. Instead, he promises to be with us always, through the wind and the waves, through conflicts and chaos, and through our own fears and anxiety. Knowing that Jesus is beside us, we find the courage to make this journey together. And we trust the power of God's love to guide us through our storms and help us safely cross over to the other side. Amen.